Where do I begin? Honestly, where do I begin with this? I mean, it... Oh, dearie me. Do you remember when there was a time when the idea of getting an episode 7, 8 and 9 was just wishful thinking? Like, it was almost sort of mythical. Like, the idea of actually getting them was practically impossible. Now that we do have them, it feels like such a gigantic waste. It really does. But I think I'm getting ahead of myself here. So before I begin, let me just say right at the start, there will be huge spoilers in this video. I'm going to be spoiling pretty much everything. So if you haven't seen the film yet, turn this video off, go and watch the film, come back to me. There we go, now that we got that out of the way. Well, first things first, let's go with the title, Rise of Skywalker. I had a theory before going into this film that this film being called The Rise of Skywalker will have virtually nothing to do with the Skywalkers. And that's pretty much the case. I mean, The Rise of Skywalker, your first impression would be, oh, is Luke going to rise to what his character should have been? No! Luke Skywalker is barely in the film. It's just... It feels like clickbait in a way, if you know what I mean. It feels like they give you this snazzy title to think, yeah, come see our film. It's The Rise of Skywalker. We're fixing what happened with The Last Jedi. We're doing Mark Hamill justice. And yeah, Luke Skywalker is better in this film than he was in The Last Jedi. He feels more like Luke in The Rise of Skywalker, but it's like too little too late. And honestly, this film feels like it should be called Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Damage Control. Because this film, a good chunk of the film is trying to fix what happened in The Last Jedi. It's like trying to retcon as much of what happened in The Last Jedi as possible. Which I can't say I blame them, because The Last Jedi was awful. But the consequence is that the story is just a mess. It feels like there was a whole other film that we missed. Because right there in the opening crawl, I remember this. The opening crawl, the first few words are, "The dead speak, Palpatine is alive." And he's broadcasting his voice across the galaxy or something like that. And I'm thinking, what? That's just a really jarring way to introduce to the audience that Palpatine is alive. Now, of course, if you've seen the trailers or if you heard anything about Rise of Skywalker, you know Palpatine is alive. But imagine, just a casual moviegoer. You've seen Star Wars in the past, but you're not exactly a big fan. Or, you're sort of a casual fan, and you know nothing about the film. Like, you go in completely cold. You haven't seen any trailers. And then suddenly in the opening crawl, it says that the big bad villain from the original films is back. Like, they just flat out just throw it in your face. And right at the beginning, we get Kylo Ren. He's going through this forest world, and he's just slashing, I'm assuming, rebels to pieces. And he's trying to get this device called a Wayfinder, which looks like an old Sith holocron. And he goes to Exegol, I think that's what they call Palpatine's world. But Exegol is apparently like an ancient homeworld of the Sith, or something like that. So, I think if J.J. Abrams wanted to try and get Star Wars fans back on board, he probably should have called it Korriban. But then again, Exegol doesn't look anything like Korriban, so I don't know. Maybe that's an idea that's not really worth exploring. But... or at least, how about this? Instead of Korriban, call it Drogon Kaas. Going from the Old Republic era. I mean, Exegol looks like it could be Drogon Kaas. But anyway, I'm getting off topic. So, Kylo Ren goes to Exegol, and he essentially meets Palpatine. And Kylo Ren says, "Oh, I killed Snoke, and I shall kill you, and I'll become the ultimate master." And Palpatine says, "I created Snoke." And the camera pans to these tubes where Palpatine's minions are literally growing about 3 more Snokes. And then it's just never addressed again. I mean, so Snoke, the big bad villain of the first and second films, he was essentially just this test tube experiment. And it doesn't really make any sense. Why would Palpatine create Snoke to lead the First Order? Why? Why not just lead the First Order himself? And this kind of goes back to a different question. I mean, anyone who's read the books or following the extended stories of the new Disney canon knows that supposedly when Palpatine died in Return of the Jedi, he had this contingency plan to tear down the old Empire, because Palpatine was essentially a selfish so-and-so. He said, oh, if the Empire cannot protect its Emperor, then the Empire doesn't deserve to live. Well, the Emperor's the Emperor's fine. So what was the point of the contingency? What was the point of tearing down the Empire? I mean, would he really just tear down his Empire and then have it sort of revert to this much smaller state called the First Order? I mean, he had control of the galaxy. If he wasn't really dead, or may have been dead or got resurrected, it's not really well explained. But regardless, if he was essentially still around, why would he allow his empire to fall? It doesn't make sense. And why would he even need the First Order? Apparently, though, he has about 10,000 Star Destroyers with Death Star cannons attached to them. Why does he need a First Order? He seems like he can just take over the galaxy, or at least keep control of the galaxy himself. And it kind of eliminates the whole point of Starkiller Base, because again, if Palpatine was secretly controlling the First Order the entire time, what was the point of Starkiller Base? I mean, yeah, it looks big and impressive, but if you literally have a fleet of Star Destroyers which can one-shot kill a planet, what was the point of this big, huge Death Star Part 3 superweapon? Yeah. So yes, Palpatine created Snoke, and it gets revealed that Rey is the granddaughter of Palpatine. And it does kind of explain why she's so powerful, because Palpatine was so powerful, but it doesn't really fix the first 2 films. I mean, all right, yes, she has this power that's inherently part of her, but you still need to be trained. And they do give a training sequence in this film to try and sort of fix the problems in the first 2 films. But again, it's like too little too late. And it really should have been Luke Skywalker training Rey. I know they tried to make Leia, it was actually this, she was actually a fully trained Jedi. But they give no hint of that in the first 2 films. I know in The Last Jedi, she does this Superman Mary Poppins sequence where she floats right back into the Raddus. But apart from that, I mean, it's just not set up well at all. I have a feeling I'm going to be missing out on so much in this review, because there's so much that goes on in this film that's wrong. It's really hard to sort of keep your mind on track, but we'll see what we can do. So the Resistance is back. Apparently they've grown their members from the 12 people that were left over after The Last Jedi. Now I know there's a book and a comic series that explains why, how and why the numbers have grown. But again, you have to sort of go back to like a casual moviegoer, to where like this casual Star Wars fan who doesn't read the books or the novels, that person, the last time this person has seen our heroes, seen the Resistance, they were reduced down to about 12 people on the Millennium Falcon. And now in this film, they have like a few hundred. So they didn't really explain that. And I know I've already said this, but it is really hard to sort of truly wrap your brain around this. But anyway, they have to find this Wayfinder, which is going to lead them to Palpatine, because Palpatine is hiding in the unknown regions on Exegol. And skipping ahead a bit, eventually, Rey and the gang find their Wayfinder. Kylo Ren finds his Wayfinder. They have a fight on the second Death Star, and this has been mentioned many times before, but the Death Star, I mean, for crying out loud, in Return of the Jedi, the Death Star was obliterated. It was essentially vaporized, and it doesn't make any sense. I mean, when Rey goes to the throne room, she actually opens a door in the throne room on the wreckage of the second Death Star. So the second Death Star still has power going through it. How? Again, watch Return of the Jedi. I mean, it was vaporized. The fact that it still has enough power to open up a door is stupid in itself. But when you look at the throne room, I mean, for crying out loud, it looks like it just it looks like I don't know. I mean, it looks like an earthquake just tore it apart, something like that. Well, I know it's in space, I know, but it just I don't know. It looks like the entire station just crash landed and broke apart. It doesn't look like a nuclear bomb went off inside it. But anyway, I suppose you can call that nitpicking. So Kylo and Rey, they fight. Leia dies. Now we knew that Leia was going to die because of the sad passing of Carrie Fisher. But her death, I found it to be quite anticlimactic. Leia's character. I mean, I suppose you could say though that she died redeeming her son, so I guess you can go with that. But I think this is always going to be the problem with Leia's character, because you have to imagine that the original plans for Leia's character was probably going to be vastly different to what actually happened. That's understandable. So I can let that one go. But Kylo becomes Ben Solo again, so he drops this whole Knights of Ren, Master of the Knights of Ren persona, and he becomes Ben Solo again. And again, I feel like I'm skipping over so much. We do see Lando. I was really pleased to see Lando. He was a bright spot in this film. And the entire time I was really scared that they were going to kill him, because Disney Star Wars seems to have a habit of killing off legacy characters, and I was really pleased to see that Lando survived. And the scenes when you have Lando and Chewie and the Millennium Falcon, they were great. That was really well done. That felt like a true Star Wars moment. So even though I'm bashing the film now, it wasn't all bad. The space battle over Exogol. Now, there was one thing that kind of got me a little bit. Apparently, this fleet of Sith Star Destroyers, it can't leave the atmosphere of this planet until they have until they get this little signal set up to where they've got this central navigation tower to try and guide them out of the atmosphere, something like that. And so when the Resistance attacks, they initially try to target this tower. And then the new First Order guy says, no, okay, well, shut down this tower, transfer the signal capacity or whatever it is to the command ship, and then we will guide the fleet out of this planet's atmosphere. And okay, it didn't make sense to me. Now I know it's in the unknown regions. It's covered with black holes and just dangerous hyperspace routes. So I understand though that they have to sort of safely guide the fleet out of the atmosphere of Exogol so they can go and attack the galaxy. I understand that. But the problem is that about half an hour earlier, maybe a bit less than that, half an hour earlier, we saw a lone Star Destroyer, one of the Death Star shooting Star Destroyers, blow up a planet. It was on its own. So how did that one Star Destroyer navigate its way out out of the unknown regions on its own, but all the other Star Destroyers can't? I mean, think of it. Are you telling me that each of these individual Star Destroyers don't have their own navigational system? They can't make their way out of Exogol and the unknown regions by themselves? They have to have one command ship to do it? That just seems like a really bad design flaw, because the Millennium Falcon can do it. The gigantic resistance fleet that arrives, they can do it. It just seems crazy to me. Like, this is probably a nitpick in itself, but it didn't make any sense to me at all. Like, how, like, this entire fleet of Star Destroyers, all 10,000 of them, they can't leave Exogol unless this one command ship leads them out. It just seemed stupid to me, but anyway. Oh, and before that giant resistance fleet arrives, the resistance force is just like one Corvette and 17 fighter craft. And the Star Destroyers, they can barely hit them. How? Why? You have 10,000 Star Destroyers. You have a bajillion TIE fighters. There's like one Corvette and 17 fighter craft. How can you not hit them? You have the firepower to essentially blow up the galaxy. How can you not hit this tiny little resistance force? It doesn't make sense to me. And even though it was a mess, I will say that the music score, when the giant resistance reinforcements come in, when all those ships come in, I mean, visually it was a bit of a mess, but the score was well done. I mean, when they arrive, it felt like a a nice little Star Wars moment. But visually, it was still a mess, because it's like they just got. You know what it reminded me of? Imagine a kid with a giant bucket of Star Wars figures, like those old Micro Machine ships. Imagine like this kid has got a giant bucket of hundreds of Micro Machine Star Destroyers, Mon Calamari cruisers, toys essentially. He's got a giant bucket of Star Wars spaceship toys, and he just chucked it out all over the floor. That's what it felt like. It felt like they just sort of regurgitated a whole fleet out of nowhere and just sent it to just go straight into the camera. I know I'm not describing this very well, but anyone who's seen the film knows exactly what I'm talking about. So, what else to really sort of say? I mean, well, yeah, Kylo Ren. Sorry, it becomes Ben Solo at this point. He redeems himself. He helps Rey fight Palpatine. And with regards to Palpatine himself, what have they done to him? And before I go any further, they don't really explain how Palpatine survived. I mean, again, the second Death Star was obliterated. Vader chucked him down the reactor core and he literally exploded. They don't explain how he's alive. In fact, in the story, when they have their little resistance meeting and Poe sort of reveals that Palpatine is alive, he literally says, somehow Palpatine is alive. And that's it. They don't explain how he survived. They don't explain it at all. Maybe I missed it in the film. I mean, someone correct me if I'm wrong, but they don't explain this whatsoever. And I'm sorry, you can't just have the big bad guy of the old series come back and not explain how he came back. And it does cheapen the final moments in Return of the Jedi. It cheapens Anakin Skywalker's sacrifice, because Darth Vader becomes Anakin Skywalker once again by throwing the Emperor down the reactor shaft. And he kills the Emperor and he redeems himself. He becomes the Chosen One. The Rise of Skywalker basically just eliminates all of that. So Vader's sacrifice is now meaningless. And he's no longer the Chosen One. Rey is now, apparently. And when you get... Well, and this is the problem, though. When you bring back the big bad guy of the original film, it feels like desperation. Because essentially, yeah, they weren't... I don't think J.J. Abrams was expecting his big bad guy, Snoke, to be killed off halfway through the second film. So it was like, oh no, what am I supposed to do now? Okay, let's re-invoke the Emperor. Yeah, it's a shame. It really is a shame. I get the feeling with this trilogy, this film is like a prime example. This whole trilogy is a prime example of why you should have one director, one vision, and one story clearly mapped out. And it just wasn't the case. J.J. Abrams really should have done the whole trilogy. Because I get the feeling The Rise of Skywalker would have been quite different if he did the second film as well. But yeah, Rey and Ben Solo, they face off against Palpatine. They don't really do much against him. Palpatine kind of just sort of flicks Ben Solo away. And Rey gets all... She gets all of the power of the Jedi. Every Jedi who ever lived, kind of, it gets transferred into her. And she sort of vaporizes the Emperor. He shoots her with Force Lightning, and then she sort of deflects it back at him, and he just sort of vaporizes. And it just seemed a bit, you know, and it shouldn't be really, because you have the final death apparently of the Emperor, and it should be this big climactic epic moment, and it wasn't, not really. Going back a little bit, when there's a moment when the Emperor literally force electrocutes the entire Resistance fleet. I am not joking. He raises his hands up in the air and he literally just electrocutes the entire Resistance fleet. It feels like bad fan fiction. It really does. I mean, it's just so... It's so lazy. It's lazy writing. And we all know that The Rise of Skywalker had all sorts of production issues. I know, I've heard the leaks as well, and yes, this film had like 6 different endings filmed. I think from what we know about the other endings, this was perhaps the best out of the bunch, or maybe I should say the least bad out of the bunch. But anyway, yeah, so the Emperor zaps Rey, and she deflects it back at him, and he vaporizes. He gets vaporized. And that's it. The Emperor is defeated. Exegol is presumably destroyed. His entire Sith fleet is gone, and apparently the First Order, or the Final Order, as he now called it, has been defeated everywhere in the galaxy. So you have to sort of wonder, what is the state of the galaxy now? Because don't forget, the New Republic is gone. Apparently the First Order is gone, unless there's some like more books or a TV show that explains that the First Order isn't really gone. They've just sort of retreated again back into the unknown regions. Like maybe the First Order have become like a new Imperial remnant, perhaps. I don't know. Personally, I don't think the First Order are completely destroyed, because Disney want to make more stories going into the future. So yeah, I'm sure the First Order are still around in some capacity. But again, the state of the galaxy. The First Order are pushed back into presumably like a remnant, I'm guessing. The New Republic is gone, unless they're going to reform it again. But it feels like the state of the galaxy is just terrible, really. Because... again, go back to the end of Return of the Jedi. The rebels defeated the Empire and restored the Republic. And the sequel trilogy just kind of feels like whatever was achieved in the original series was just a waste. mean, think about it. You know that celebration scene at the end of Return of the Jedi? They're all celebrating on Endor, and, you know, it shows Coruscant and Naboo and Tatooine celebrating the fall of the Empire. Doesn't that all feel a bit sort of now? Because you kind of know that like 30 years later, it's just all going to go down the drain. Yeah. I don't know. So yeah, there's not really much more I can say about this film. I don't know how long it'll be going on now. And I know this review has kind of been more like a rambling review, but honestly, there's not really much more I can say about this film that can really sort of illustrate my point more. This film is really, a good portion of it is damage control from the mistakes of the last film. And from what I said earlier on, I mean, you know, there was a point where the idea of getting episodes 7, 8 and 9 seemed like an impossibility. Now that we have it, it's just such a waste. Would I recommend Rise of Skywalker? No, not really. I mean, is it worse than The Last Jedi? That's a difficult thing to answer, because I blame The Last Jedi for what happened in The Rise of Skywalker. I think The Rise of Skywalker is a consequence of what happened in The Last Jedi. So it's a hard one to say. I don't even know if I can really answer that question. I mean, there were some enjoyable moments in The Rise of Skywalker. I mean, the visuals were great. The music was great. There were a couple of entertaining moments here and there. I can't really say that I hated it. I mean, I didn't flat out. I didn't flat out hate The Rise of Skywalker like I hate The Last Jedi. Because believe me, I tried rewatching The Last Jedi not too long ago. I couldn't do it. It's just awful. I think with The Rise of Skywalker, you really do have to switch off your brain and then just enjoy the visuals, enjoy the special effects going on. That's really the mindset you kind of have to have. So I don't particularly like The Rise of Skywalker, but I can't really say that I hated it anywhere near as much as I hated The Last Jedi. So, but I can't really recommend it either. Put it this way, if you watched the first film, Force Awakens, and you liked it, you liked Last Jedi, you're bound to like The Rise of Skywalker. But is The Rise of Skywalker a good film? No, not really. There's a few good moments, but ultimately it's not really a good film. But on a note, there's perhaps something good that will come out of this. Because now that the Skywalker saga is apparently finished, it wasn't finished in a good way, but it's finished. So now that the whole Skywalker story is done, maybe now we can branch off and do different stories in the Star Wars universe. I know they've announced that they're going to do some films set in the Old Republic era, which is great. I think that's a really good thing. Let's have some stories which kind of veer away from the Empire and the Rebels. You know, let's sort of explore the mythos of the Jedi and the Sith, or not even just that. Just you know, the Star Wars galaxy is a big galaxy. Let's see what else is inside the galaxy. And you know, when you look at the numerous novels and comic books, especially from the Legends material, they really do go deep into the mythology of Star Wars. They really do explore the origins of the Sith and the Jedi, or some ancient alien races that populated the galaxy well before the Republic became a thing. If you saw some of that on the big screen, I think that would be really, really popular. I think that would be really well received. And also, if you're delving into some stories where you don't have to really know necessarily what went on in the past, like you're not relying on nostalgia, the creativity should be incredible. So I'm hoping that whenever we get a new Star Wars film, however many years down the line, because Disney has said there'll be a slowdown, which I think is a good thing, to be honest. I hope that whatever the new Star Wars film is, we get to see some true creative genius out of it, because unfortunately with this trilogy, the sequel trilogy, it's just been creatively bankrupt. It really has been. But anyway, one thing I will say is I'm curious to see what Kevin Feige does with his Star Wars film. He's done a really good job with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I think if he has some control in the Star Wars universe, I think you could see some good things from him. But anyway, that's my review, guys. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.